Today, we're going to do a little process breakdown for my newest illustration called What the Meek See. This is mostly in part because of how many people freak out the moment they hear that AI is used. And the goal here is to show you how it can be used in an effective way without infringing on anyone else's rights, without losing or giving up your own creativity and your own artistic license as an artist, and how to actually have it benefit you without limiting yourself, how to only have it add to you. So this is the final result that you're seeing here. This illustration took me over 111 hours, completed entirely in Procreate. So I've selected 69 slides, just so happen to be 69, covering the entire process from the automatic generated time lapse in Procreate to explain the process. So without further ado, let's continue here. So this first slide is after about an hour or two of sketching. And what I did here was use one reference. It all started with one reference that I wanted to study with a woman holding her head up with her hand like this. But then I decided to add everything else that you see here. So I had this idea of, okay, I want to draw a lot of hands. I sketched out some hands holding up her breast as if it was a bra made out of hands. I had some hands coming out from behind her that were holding up a veil that I wanted to cover her face that she was looking through. I wasn't sure if I was going to have the hands actually coming out from her back. And I thought that this pose would help because from the reference, you don't really see much of her body outside of this area. Next, I decided to change up the pose of the hands, just following my own intuition and creativity. By the way, just to be clear, there's no AI used whatsoever. This is just me sketching with my own Ergo Sketch 3.0 brush pack in Procreate. So I thought, what if she's like kind of looking through a hole in her eye, making the okay symbol here and holding up her head with the other hand. Here, you see quite a significant change because now I'm like, okay, I want to start refining the anatomy more. So I found some photo reference of hands from various places. I decided to try to draw these hands better and use a little bit more of a atmospheric, kind of like a fisheye perspective for this. You see me constructing the arm anatomy from what I know from memory, from my studies previously. You see the arm is a lot more refined here and the face looks a lot more 3D. At this point, I have refined a lot more of the line work and the anatomy for the body. Again, using a mixture of just my own imagination and whatever reference images I found from Pinterest, for example, which were all photographs for the most part. Some of them were artworks. And at this point, I had also used my own hands as reference to refine the hands above her even more. And I thought, you know what, I might just have these hands floating above her. At this point, this is after I decided to try working on the veil a little bit more. It's not showing here because I completely scrapped the idea, but I refined her face a lot because I just didn't like how it looked. It wasn't really stylized as much as I'd wanted. And so at this point, I used some reference that had been generated by AI by other artists, as well as my own intuition for all the faces I've drawn to construct this. And it really is no different from me looking at reference of, let's say, Ilya Kuvshinov, like I've done many, many times in the past to construct this face and have it have an appealing look with the shape of the eyes that I wanted. But again, I didn't generate any reference myself. I didn't overlay any references or include any AI in this illustration at this point whatsoever. Here, I decided, okay, I don't like her body pose. So I found 4 references from a reference pack done by, I believe it was Obscura or Graffiti Studio. And there was a model that was sitting on the floor in various poses, and I would study them while I was streaming on Twitch and decide that I was going to pick one of these 4 to use for the illustration. So I was going to basically Frankenstein, as I like to call it, her head and hands onto one of these bodies. So I decided on these 2 as the final contestants, and you can see from the previous slide, I overlaid it here, I shrunk it down and tried to get it to fit. They both looked good to me at the time, but this one was the one I went with, but I ended up not liking it because once I started working on it more, I found it didn't work really well with the rest of the body at all. Now here, you see I have selected the final pose of the finished drawing here. And this is where I start exploring, well, what if I make the hair a lot more wild and vibrant and flowy at this point, right? I still have not used AI whatsoever other than to look at some of the random AI images that have come up on Pinterest. I started sketching loosely what this could be like. Here you see me going even further, using references that I had found from other artworks online, especially some of those AI artworks, for coming up with this hair, but also looking at the hair from the initial reference to design the flow pattern for all of this. Here, you see I have brought in a grid, a perspective grid, to try to figure out and correct some of the perspective and proportions for the anatomy, but also because I decided I wanted the hair to be a lot more dynamic and feel like it was coming towards the viewer and going back into space. So instead of drawing, I felt like that was way too limiting. I just got a brush and started painting really rough gestural shapes to see and get a feel for what was going on. But at this point, I felt like I have this faint image of what I want in my mind that's a lot more refined than this. And I felt like I needed some help. And I knew that if I could use AI to generate something similar to what I was trying to come up with, just floating hair in a abyss or a void, then I could use that to guide me. So this is with a little bit more refinement. I tested out some different hands here that would be holding up the veil, but I decided maybe they're not going to be holding a veil. And then I went back to the original hands I had because I just thought they looked better, except if we go back again, we see I kept this hand. So I liked this new one, but I went back to the original one for this, which you see here. And so here is where we finally have AI being used. So I generated several images in Midjourney of hair just flowing about in space. And sometimes it would actually generate a character's head, which is not what I wanted. So I would erase that. And so I brought it in, I cut it up, I cropped it. I would use the liquify tool, and I would try to shape the hair in a flow that was similar to what I wanted with this. And I wanted it to be in multiple layers. So you see that this is actually 3 different images. If I switch to a different color here, or 3 different sections, there's this one below it, and then there's this one over here. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see I added even more. And what I did was I started to trace some of the basic shapes here. Now, a lot of you freaked out hearing, oh my God, he traces. But as an experienced artist, when I trace something, I know how to trace it in a way that still adheres to my own skill and artistic intuition for shape design. I'm not going to go in here like a newbie would and trace every single little thread and stick to the lines that were there. No, I'm going to actually blur my vision a bit and find the bigger shapes that I find appealing here and use it as inspiration. So as you see, these images I generated are not very artistic at all. They're 3D. They're almost photorealistic. And the result, as you saw, is not photorealistic at all. I just wanted the general cascading shape of this. No one person can say that they own hair flowing about that's being lit in this way, right? And even if there is an image that looks exactly like this, the end result is not even close to what this is. And if I had found an image that had hair like this, which I didn't, by the way, I had searched for a lot of hair images on Pinterest before that you'll see in this video that helped, but didn't give me this expression or feeling that I wanted. You can see clearly this basically doesn't even look like I had used AI in the image at all. I used it as a tool to help guide me. Many people said, oh, you could have done this, you could have done that. Yeah, I could have also made this person have an alligator head with teeth. I could have done an infinite number of things, but I chose to use the tools that I had available. My camera to photograph my hand, images on Pinterest, references that I purchased from real people that posed and sell those photographs, and I purchased them from ArtStation. I used everything, right? So when you hear, oh, someone used AI, you need to think a lot more critically about how that can be used. This isn't a game. This isn't a war about being who's right or who's wrong or who's good or who's bad. This is about growing and maturing in your own skill and learning new skill sets and finding a place where they can be fitting to your own complex view of the world and your own morality here. This isn't supporting theft, right? That's a very simple-minded way to view this. And I say that with complete confidence when you hear that someone used a tool and you associate it with everything else. It's extremely immature, and it's part of why I'm making this video, because I feel this needs to be said, and a lot of people are fearful about saying this, but I'm in a position where I can express this. So let's continue. Here you see I have traced even more, and I have one of the original images off to the side because I wanted to capture the essence of it and use it as a reference without actually tracing it as well. So I'm aware of all of these different nuanced things. A newbie would just take the image and just trace it and try to hope that it would fit. I know that I need to skew the images. I know that I need to use multiple layers. I know that I need to cut it and it's not going to be perfectly how I want. This is one of several images of this exact type that I used to create this. You see these lines, it's just a mess. Like, what is that? But I decide to find random shapes here that fit an idea of what I'm looking for, right? You see, this doesn't look like the exact image that's there. I don't trace every single line. So now you can see without the images below, the AI generated images from Midjourney, what the hair begins to look like. And it's quite, you could almost say it's messy. The line weights are kind of everywhere, but you can see some of these original shapes I had here, right? Do you see that in the hairline? Do you see that shape there? It's not really there. I envisioned it and I added it and I changed it afterwards without even having the reference there to get the result that I wanted. I remain the artist in control here. I am the one making the decisions. And that is what separates me from someone who uses AI to just shit out artworks, sorry for that crude term, and just say that they're theirs. I'm a director here. It's like I'm directing a film. I have an idea of what I want and I'm stopping at nothing until it gets to that place that I want. Here I hide the hair and I'm thinking about making the eyes a lot more intense. And you can see I just had fun painting in the lips red, and I thought that might be a cool symbolic idea. Earlier when I had the black wisps flowing around like this, I thought of having an orb here and her having a little laser piercing that orb. I thought that was cool, and that's something that persists through the rest of the process. But you can see I really liked that image and what that represents, just the solid lips there. And I thought, wait a second, once I opened up the eyes, I kind of wanted to change the eye position so that it looks more convincing that she's looking through this orb in that direction. So here you can see I refined that a little bit, and I wasn't sure if, I kind of like how she's looking at the viewer here. I like this eyebrow here being very obvious in her raised expression. And you see these breaks in her body are areas where the hair is flowing through, and I had that masked out using a mask in Procreate. Now you can see the hair added back in. You can see what I was talking about with those breaks in the body line. And I was really liking how this flow was going. I loved how I was able to add hair that was flowing through her fingers so that it looks like it's in this scene, right? You see the hair flowing in between her fingers here. I really loved how that looked, and I was very happy with the composition at this point. I knew that this is where I wanted to go with the image. Now you see, I rendered a few more images of hair that were a lot more stylized, and they were very light gray. I'll show what the full versions of them look like. And I decided I wanted a little bit more dynamism, but I wanted to really make sure that it fit into the space. So what I did was I took this image that I had drawn, the line work, I brought it into PureRef on my Mac, and then used it as an overlay and went to a perspective grid website and adjusted the grid so that it fit exactly the perspective I had drawn this character in, so that I could bring that perspective grid back into my artwork in Procreate and actually manipulate the hair into the correct perspective here. This is a very high level of work and intention and rigor that I'm doing because I have a certain standard that I want with my work, and I want it to feel a certain way. This isn't just copy and tracing, like you hear and think like a 5-year-old when you hear the word tracing. And so I'm saying this again to push that people need to think more when they hear certain terms being used. It used to be that using digital art meant that you weren't shit, that you didn't know how to paint at all. But now look, right? It isn't so simple as if you use this, you don't know shit, you're nothing. It's a lot more complex. And I know many people wouldn't have the ability to actually be able to think this critically about their work. I'm not saying you need to or it means anything, but this is me showing how much intention and care I put into this illustration, right? And it's something that people need to be able to do if they want to start standing out, because these tools are going to allow people to do bigger and better projects much faster. I don't have to have years of learning perspective to be able to do this anymore. This tool is online for free. It might as well be an AI as well, right? So let's continue. I randomly decided to have the background pink, and I decided it was helpful to refine the lines, so I started to do that. Here's me refining and trying to decide what I wanted to do with the eyes, if I want to have them looking this way, if I wanted to have them looking at the viewer. I shrunk the head a little bit because I noticed it was a little bit too big. And here I finally start committing to the hair design and erasing away so that I could get a mask for the body that was not covered by the hair. And here, you see, I finally start going into the extremely laborious process of masking away every single strand and lock of hair that I wanted so that I could manipulate them separately in my painting. At some point as well, I also thought I wanted to have the grid line behind her, and I would keep the overall illustration very high key. So you see some of it is erased there for me to get an idea of what it would look like. And here I started to color and fill in much more roughly and use different colors to decide what is closer to the viewer and what is further back in distance. And you can see, again, even with all the AI I used before, I still went in and drew new locks of hair based off of the heightened intuition I have when I draw via painting shapes versus just using line. So even then, the final result for the cascade of hair is something that I could not get with AI alone. I had to have my own vision for this, and I followed it to the very end. Here is where I finally start testing out, okay, what's going to be the lighting scheme for this? And I thought, why not have it really dark and black? And I thought of a certain piece that Loish did in the past that I really liked. And I was inspired by that. I looked at that for reference. I broke down the values and I did something really rough here with a soft brush. Here, I went back to it being high key and thought maybe it would look better like this with very light gray background. I don't know. I was still not sure. At this point, I'm refining the lines for the hair even more, and I'm changing the color of the line work for the hair so that I can clearly see it with what I had already done and clearly see it separate from the line work for the body. And here, I'm finally getting to the point where I've almost colored in all of the hair, and I knew I wanted it all to be red for this. Here, I make a lot more progress shading the body, and I started adding a lot more details with the lighting, but I was doing this with it mostly lit really bright in the background. And I still wasn't entirely sure where it would go, but I was happy with this area. It was starting to look nice and complete. And here is where I take that light shading and I use a screen layer, most likely, to apply it to a darker background. And I decide to keep her body dark red and just have the piece very monochromatic to start off with. And I start shading what I believe to be the parts of the hair that would be lit directly by the light source, which would be this orb right here. I also thought I would have a light source coming in from the top like this, but that conflicted and I decided for the only light source to be this orb. Here, I went back again thinking, well, maybe do I want it to be bright and have it really pink and have the hair flowing around in this bright white space? And maybe these light pinks here kind of looked cool. And I thought, well, if this doesn't work, maybe it will still work out for a painting in the future. Here is where I played around with some layers and discovered, wait, it looks really good, bright red right here. And started just quickly putting in some areas of shadow here to give the background some depth. And once I did that, I knew that this is going to be where the painting would go because I really loved how this composition looked overall. And I knew I wanted a very light lavender contrasting with the reds and pinks. Here, it's just a little bit more refinement, starting to get that velvety texture in the hair a bit more. Here you can see I'm isolating the hair to paint, which helps me a lot when I isolate certain parts. Here I've added a lot more shadows to give the overall painting a lot more dynamism, but I'm starting to notice that her face looks really weird and that I drew the eyes almost offset in this direction way too far, and they don't look right because they were originally kind of opened very slightly like this. And so when I made that change, it just wasn't right. Here, I start playing around with how this would look with lighting coming from the orb that's just global lighting. Maybe that would bridge some of these values and fix those errors. But although it did help me get a good vision for the overall image, it still didn't fix what I thought it would, and it started to lose details. So here, I use a layer to start reworking the face. I decided I'm just going to completely redraw the face. I'm going to use some references from someone I think draws faces really well, which was John Zalistra. I just had them off to the side and was working on the face that I felt would be best for this here. So after a while, I get something more realistic, more stylized, but still she kind of looks like a gremlin a bit. So I keep going. Looks a little bit better, but her chin is a little bit too masculine. I played with an elf ear here and I decided I really liked it. And so what I did here was decide, okay, well, I've already shaded a lot of the stuff, so maybe I could cut that out and mold it to fit the new lines that I had drawn for the face. So I did that and I isolated the body entirely and went ahead and started to add a tail, because I thought that would be cool. I've never drawn a tail before, and I thought it would be a good match with the elf ear here. And so here, I had done a little bit more refinement on the face, if you can tell from the lines, but not with the shading. So her chin is smaller, it looks a little bit more feminine, it looks more just appealing overall. And I had made a lot of work with the line weight for the hair and added a lot more details. And as you can see, this again looks nothing like the AI that I used. At this point, I'm not using, probably well before this point, I'm not using the AI as a reference anymore at all that I generated for the hair. It's back to just being me. I made over 115,000 strokes to complete this illustration. Every single pixel is painted by yours truly. So here I start trying to bridge these shapes back in that I had painted. Since I had isolated them, I'm getting a lot more detail and refinement with the body and getting a lot of subtle values in here, subtle value changes that help me express the form. And here I brought that back into the full illustration to see how things look. But the lines are starting to look a little bit too much and her face still kind of looks weird. So now I hide all of that and I start to select, like I often do, and remove the face and try to work on it isolated again. And here, after doing that, I decided to break down the values using Clip Studio Paint quickly. I exported the whole thing and I messed with the curves and stuff using a couple apps on the iPad just for photo editing. So in Clip Studio Paint, what I did was I used the posterize tool to break this down into 4 values only after making it grayscale. And then I would use other illustrations I thought were really good and do the same thing and look at how their values were broken down and compare them to mine. And so I realized that I would paint this way and try to isolate and change which shapes do I want to be in the light and which ones do I want to be overall in the grayscale. And so here, this is me doing a little bit of work on it. Let me clear this so you can see the differences. I'm starting to erase a lot of the lines. Here I am adjusting the size of the hands and the head a bit and the shape of the head with the line work. I realized that after looking at the values only, so I shrunk them down. And here is where I get to the final level of refinement for the face. Just because of the progress I made with the grayscale corrections, I was able to come back and refine the face to a point where I'm very, very happy with it. And it looks stylized. And I even took the time to redraw this hand based off of a photo of my hand and a anatomy reference from a website called hatoking.com. And I used an AI generated image of an elf boy. And I liked how the ear looked in that image that I saw on Pinterest. So I just copied it. Could have been another artist painting that I looked at to copy. It made no difference, right? But because I say that it's AI, all of a sudden it's problematic. That's the problem I'm addressing with this video. Just another example. I think that's silly. Here, I shaded in the face with one of my famous sketching brushes from my Ergo Sketch 3.0 brush pack and started to adjust the hair to fit the new hand and to fit the new size of this hand here. So that took a little bit of backtracking, but overall, I'm happy with the decision. And I'm very happy with the line work at this point. So now you can see how much better the shapes are with the changes I did to the value system. So now you can see much better shapes that define the overall image very clearly without being too complicated, even though there is a lot of line work going on in this painting. And I've included the tail in this as well. And you can tell that the light source should be somewhere right here because that's where the brightest parts of the image are. So here, I use a special process to bring that value system back into the original painting. And then I start trying to bring everything back to this level with the colors and the values here. So that took a while, but I eventually got it to work. And now this is finally looking like how the final image looks. And you see the lines are red here because I wanted to continue to refine the line work for the hair, but it was so chaotic that I wanted to clearly see what I had drawn and what I hadn't drawn and all that. So here I'm starting to erase a lot of the lines and hide them because the more edges I can make look right without the line work, the better it will be overall in the end. So you can see the progress I made here with how that edge works nicely even without the lines, how the edge of her face here works really nicely even without the lines, working even more, lots of little refinements with the shadows and the highlights, trying to see. I use multiple different values for the velvety light lit parts of the hair to make sure that if a hair strand over here is lit, it's not nearly as bright as one that's this close or one that's this close. Here's where I remove all the lines again and start to work with it just to see how far I can take it without worrying about without needing the line work. And so you can see areas like this look really nice and refined, and you can understand the hair starts to actually look three-dimensional here, right? This is nothing like how the images looked that I generated from Midjourney do, right? They were hyper realistic. They were grayscale. They were flat. They had every single hair strand there. These are nice velvety pieces of fabric, really. They're not really hair strands. They just look like they are because of the way I drew them. And at this point, I decided, okay, well, let me start going in here, start adding some fun purple colors to the hair, start really refining the detail and getting these hair locks to look 3D, adding some subsurface scattering to the ear and the nose here, and really refining all the fingers. And here is where I used another tool, which is just a photo filter that I use from apps like PixArt or Ultralight on my iPad. And I really like how it made the colors really cool. This is something I'll often do. I'll bring it into one of those apps, or I'll bring it into the Photos app, and then I will adjust the lighting or the contrast, just like any artist would in Photoshop. And sometimes I'll use filters and I'll like how it looks, and I'll bring that filter back into Procreate, and then I'll overlay it somehow because I don't always like how it looks perfectly. I always want more of the raw image in there. So now you can see that's with that added. Some vignetting has been applied to the edges. The colors are a little bit cooler. You see that cool highlight here, some purples here in the skin, a lot more refinement in the hand here. I hid the orb because I want it to be able to stand alone without it. That's me taking a lot of initiative to make sure I can paint this and I don't neglect it because the orb is going to be translucent. And so here I adjust the colors again using various filters and just curves in Procreate, and I'm refining it even more. You can see the difference here is where I'm getting the hair to flow a little bit better, hiding some parts, making them more precise. And here you can see I did a huge change here, which I think really, really improved the piece. I brightened up a lot more of the values here so that they merged and flowed together and reduced the size of her mouth a bit, which made her look gave her a little bit more character here. And instead of just the one big orb, I wanted to have it kind of resemble a planetary entity or star in some way. And I started to add some subtle colors. I did that well before, but some subtle colors to the eyes here, and thinking about how this area of the hand would be lit. And how I had to make sure that even though these values are all similar, how can I get this hand to stand out and look like it's in front of her face? So a lot of challenges I had to solve here. And you can see I start getting rid of some of the lines, which make this look a lot softer and ephemeral. You can see there was a lot of work done here, which is where this is almost done. I soften a lot of the shadows here. You can see I add some more shadows here to give this depth. I refine some of the craziness here, like this shadow here. I make this one simple shape instead of this chaotic mess here, so it reads even better, adding a little bit more finer details. And you can see here, I improve these shadows a lot more. I soften these up more. And here I start playing with this idea of the laser again. Maybe this looks like an atom with the electrons flying around. Light, maybe it's coming from the center. Just testing out different ideas. But I decided to bring in a texture from another illustration that I hadn't used yet and try to make it look like a sun, like a star, which was really cool. And I'm really happy with how it looks because it kind of looks like it's molten magma of a sort, right? Like maybe the core of the earth. And here's where I'm playing with, maybe there's some like lasers or just stars, maybe mini galaxies floating through here from her eye. Here you can see I added a lot of noise to the light source. And here is where we have the final image where I settle on those little particles here because I want to keep the focus drawn to this area instead of streaming out this way. And that's where we're at now with the final illustration. So I hope you enjoyed this and found it helpful and useful. And I hope that you see now that AI can be used in a way that doesn't infringe on any individual artist's copyright. This is all my work, clearly. And it would be extremely difficult for you to create this from AI. The way she's holding the hair strands in her hands, the way she's crouching, the perspective, the hair and the style of it. It's unique to me, and I'm very proud of it. And I followed the intuition from the very beginning of this work, which looked nothing like this, right? So please share this with everyone that likes art and is concerned with AI art so that you can see that there is a lot more to this discussion and that we shouldn't be so divisive and calling each other names and villains and trying to say someone is an artist or isn't an artist just because they mention that they use a certain tool that you don't agree with. I'm not happy with that, and I want to hold everyone to a higher standard so that we can respect each other more in this community and move further and have more artists, because the more artists in the world, I believe the better the world will be. So thank you very much. This is Ergo Josh, and stay tuned for a print of this illustration in the future. Take care, stay balanced, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.